You've had smoked pulled pork, but have you ever had smoked pulled venison? Smoky, juicy, tender meat piled high on a bun, drizzled with barbecue sauce, delicious, satisfying, the perfect summertime barbecue meal. Now I've had this little venison roast that came from a deer hindquarter in the freezer basically since November, and I've been hanging on to it just for this occasion. And that is when it's finally warm enough to fire up the smoker and start barbecuing. Now it's true that pulled pork is perhaps one of the easiest and most forgiving things to make on a smoker, particularly an offset smoker like the one I'm using. Smoking a venison roast to make pulled venison is not really anywhere near as simple and straightforward. And that's because of two main reasons that we already know about venison, and that's that it's very lean, there's barely any fat in it, and it's super easy to dry that meat out. Because of that, we can't just throw it in the smoker for hours and hours and hours and have it come out juicy and tender. There's some other things we have to do to it. We have to take into account and compensate for the fact that it is very non-fatty and that it can be very well dried out if you don't do it right. So we're gonna move outside, fire up the smoker, go through all the steps to make this amazing pulled venison, and of course we have to make a few little accessories to go with it along the way. So I'll end this intro here. Let's make some pulled venison. For this meat, I'll be using my Oklahoma Joe combo smoker, and the first thing I need to do is get my coals going. So I'll get a chimney full of lump charcoal burning. And when they're good and hot, into the firebox they go, followed by a couple small wood splits. I'm using a combination of oak and maple today. I'll let this burn away for a bit and get the smoker up to temperature. In the meantime, let's prepare the venison. This is a bottom round roast that came from the hind quarter of a deer I butchered last November. I didn't completely trim it before freezing, so I have to do that now. Basically, I'll do my best to remove the silver skin and any bits of fat I happen to see. And I'll trim it up a bit just to be a little more symmetrical. I've got this thin flap here that I think I'll get out of there. That's looking pretty good, so now I'm just going on with my spice rub. I could have used a binder like mustard or olive oil, but it wasn't super necessary and all this rub stuck to the roast just fine. I'll make sure to apply a heavy coat to all the surfaces and sides, and today I'm using one of my homemade rubs that I actually made for a pork shoulder I smoked a couple weeks ago, but it works very nicely on venison too. Now I'll just set this aside for a few more minutes until the smoker is ready. Okay, smoker is up to temperature, so it's time to put in the meat. I always use a probe thermometer system so I can constantly monitor both the internal temperature of the meat and also the ambient temperature inside the smoker right where the meat is sitting. For this smoke, I'm aiming to maintain my temperature in the 250 to 275 degree range. I'll let that smoke away until the internal temperature of that venison reaches about 160 degrees, so we'll pick it back up here in a couple hours. Okay, and here we are after a couple hours. The venison has a decent looking bark on it, and it's looking pretty nice to me. So at this point, that venison is about as smoky as it's gonna get. I could probably make it smokier, but it's at this time that I wanna get it out of that dry, smoky heat and start, accounting for the fact that it's gonna wanna dry out real bad because of how lean it is. So now is when I'm going to take that piece of venison and transfer it into one of these disposable aluminum roasting pans, and basically it's going to braise for the rest of the way. And now is also when I'm going to introduce some fat to this operation in the form of pork lard. I'll set about 1/4 cup of lard right on top, and it'll melt right down as soon as it goes back into the heat. Now is also a good time to introduce some more flavor, so I'll smash several whole cloves of garlic and throw those in. And of course, since this will be a braise, we need to add some liquid. So in goes about 2 cups of beef stock. Now to put that thermometer probe back into the meat, and then cover and tightly seal up that pan with aluminum foil. Now it's going back into the smoker until the meat is super tender. A couple more hours. I'll bump up the temperature slightly to somewhere in the 275 to 300 range, and just braise away. I could certainly have done this step in the oven because at this point the smoker is pretty much just acting as a wood-fired oven, but I'm already out here and the smoker is already hot, so that's what I'm doing. And in the meantime, there's a couple other things we have to make, starting with the barbecue sauce. I thought a slightly fruity barbecue sauce would go great with this venison, as would a little touch of heat. So I'm whipping up a small batch of Cherry Chipotle BBQ sauce. And no, we are not starting with ketchup. Of course we're not starting with ketchup. Ketchup isn't an ingredient, it's a crime against humanity. I'll start with some tomato paste, followed by 2 of the chipotle peppers from this little can of chipotles in adobo, along with about 2 teaspoons of the adobo sauce, also from that can. Next is some white vinegar and apple cider vinegar, some water, brown sugar, white sugar, molasses, soy sauce, lime juice, a tiny bit of liquid smoke, kosher salt, black pepper, onion powder, garlic powder. I'll give everything a quick preliminary whisk and then add in my cherries. Pretty much any cherries will work as long as they're pitted. I'm using sweet dark cherries that I bought frozen and thawed out. And by the way, I'll put a link in the video description to this full Cherry Chipotle barbecue sauce recipe in case you want to try it for yourself. Now I need to move over to the stove and start cooking this sauce on medium-low heat. I'll bring it up to a low simmer, stirring pretty frequently. There's a lot of sugar in this sauce and I don't want any of it scorching. And after it's simmered for a few minutes, I'll go at those cherries a little bit with a potato masher, just to help them along and release more juices. I'll let it simmer for another few minutes, just until it's about the right consistency, and then there's just one more thing to do. Carefully transfer all of that boiling magma into a blender and puree until it's all a smooth, consistent sauce. I don't want any chunks of cherries or chipotle peppers in my final sauce. Now I'll just pour it all into a mason jar and let it cool for a while until it's time to use later on. Once that venison is getting somewhat close to being done, it's time to make my crispy fried onion straws, which I think go absolutely great with a pulled meat sandwich of any sort. So I'll get started by slicing up a large sweet onion. I'll slice it with the grain, basically as thinly as I can. Then all those onion strips are going into a bowl, and I'll cover them with some buttermilk. Regular milk would also be fine. I'll put this bowl in the fridge and let these onions soak for about 20 minutes. And in the meantime, I'll get my oil heated up. Using this single burner propane stove and my deep-walled cast iron pan, I'll heat up a few inches of vegetable oil to about 350 degrees. And when it's just about time to fry, I'll get another bowl with some all-purpose flour and season with some of my spice rub just to add some more flavor. And I'm sure you see where this is going. I'll let the excess buttermilk drain from the onions and coat them thoroughly in that flour, taking care to separate each onion strip so each piece gets fully coated on all sides. Now it's time to fry. And this is a vat of screaming hot oil, so great care must be taken at all times. So definitely put way too many onions in all at once like an idiot, thus ensuring a horrible and dangerous overflow and an absolutely colossal oil stain on your driveway that you'll see every single day for the next 20 years. Anyway, I'll pull those onions out when they're looking beautifully golden brown, and then do a few much smaller batches until I've fried all my onions, and then set them aside on a wire rack to drip for a couple minutes. And the venison is finally finished cooking, and it's finally time to shred it up and make a sandwich. So I'll transfer the meat to a separate pan so I can shred it up, and I'll give it another hit of that spice rub just for good measure. I'll also mix in some of that braising liquid as I go. I want this meat juicy and moist, but not absolutely saturated and swimming in the liquid. I could also mix in some barbecue sauce at this time, but for this particular sandwich, I prefer to add the sauce on a sandwich by sandwich basis. Now to begin assembling the sandwich. I've got some nice brioche buns that I'll brush with some melted butter, so I can toast them on the flat top insert in the propane grill part of this smoker combo. Once the buns are looking beautiful, we build. I'll pile up a nice fistful or two of the pulled venison, a heavy drizzle of that chipotle cherry barbecue sauce, gotta get some pickles on there, and top it all off with some of those fried onions. And now, after much anticipation and a ruined driveway, it's time to dig in. So that's about it. Yeah, there's a few different steps, but if making pulled or otherwise smoked venison is something that you've always wanted to try, but you've heard that it can't be done, well, it certainly can be done. But of course, you can only partially smoke it. You have to do something else to cook it the rest of the way, such as braising. But it's absolutely doable, so get out there and give it a try. And check out the video description below. I'll put a link in there to the full recipe for that Chipotle cherry barbecue sauce if you're interested in trying that out. And I'll also include a few links to some of the gadgets and various things that I used in the making of this video. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future meat smoking videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.